Good evening, everyone. Welcome to today's Policy and Resources Committee. And excuse the croaky throat at some points. This is a public meeting and members of the public and press are permitted to report on the proceedings. Reporting includes filming, photographing, making an audio recording and providing commentary on proceedings. Please note this meeting is recorded and streamed live. These recordings are published on the relevant meeting page of the Council's website. By choosing to attend this public meeting, you are deemed to have given your consent to being filmed or recorded and for any footage to be broadcast or published. If the alarm sounds, the premises must be evacuated immediately. Do not spend time collecting personal belongings. All emergency escape routes are clearly signed. Once you have left the building, the assembly point is in the High Street opposite the Guildhall. Members and other speakers are reminded to use their microphone when speaking. Thank you. So, starting with appointments of substitutes. I think we have some.
Yes, Chair, sorry, I haven't got the microphone, so I'll talk a bit more loudly than usual. Sue Smith is here for Adrian Gregson, Aaron Holmes is here for Mel Alcott, and Paul Subject is here for Helena Ryan.
Thank you very much. Any declarations of interest? I'm looking for hands. Jessie?
I was involved in the initial stages of for the SCAL item. I'm no longer involved and I don't know if it's relevant anymore, but just thought I'd raise it.
I think it probably isn't. I'm looking at Sian. No, I think, yeah.
I'm not sure it's relevant. I'm a member of Perdisvagem. Perdisvagem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Public representations, I don't believe we have any. Which brings us to the minutes of the last meeting, which was on the 30th of July. So if I go through those page by page, any comments or I can't believe there could possibly be any corrections, but we'll see. Page 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then the appendix was the outside bodies appointments agreed at that meeting. So are people happy that I sign off the minutes as an accurate record of that meeting? Nods? Yep. Thank you very much. We did also have some exempt items at that meeting. So I suggest that we take that now because we also have another exempt item. So suggest under section 100A, brackets 4 of the Local Government Act 1972, the press and public be excluded from the meeting for the following items of business on the grounds that they are likely to involve, that they involve the likely disclosure of information as defined in Schedule 12A of the said Act. Thank you. And I've already said sorry to Phil. somebody want to call back in the press? Thank you. If we can resume then, agenda item 5, process and timetable for preparation of the budget for 25-26 and the medium-term financial plan. So this is about process and timetable. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. For those members who've been with us a number of years, this will be a familiar process. So we will kick off generally with the all members meeting, which has now been scheduled for the 14th of October. So that should all be in your calendars. And we'll look at the pressures that we've got coming up and the things that we're facing. We'll look at the latest position with the medium-term financial plan. Unfortunately, I don't think we'll have this year's salary settled by that stage, which is a bit of a shame. It usually comes at the end of the month, so we'll get that picture. But we'll start with that, and then I'll work our way through the committees as always. Just an apologies, Lynn, I haven't added in the Health and Wellbeing Committee, which is on October 27th, I think. So sorry about that. We will then get to the draft budget in December, by which stage we'll be presenting to a series of potential options for meeting any budget gap which is presented. And of course, as David has been saying, you know, the settlement isn't going to be early. It's very fluid at the moment. It's really quite difficult to understand how to plan within a situation where we have so many variables, and we're only going to get a short-term settlement. It's not going to be a long to medium-term thing. But so that will probably arrive Christmas Eve, and then we will, as always, update what we've done in the December budget, December P&R committee. Talk to all of the various committees about things that you'd like to see changed from the budget that's coming up, and take us through to February. So it's the usual process. Hopefully it's familiar to most people, but if there's any queries about that, then happy to answer them, or Mark will help.
I'm not seeing any hands up. I mean, you say it is a process that longer-standing councillors are familiar with, and it does enable debate and negotiations within committees and between committees and during that process. So if we can, do we need to formally add in to the timetable Health and Wellbeing Committee? Yeah. I did mention in the draft. So with that addition, are people happy to...
Just one of the comments, Rachel.
Okay.
Just a reminder, we're also looking at that date of the 14th, which I just mentioned. We're thinking about changing it to Tuesday the 15th, aren't we?
We are. Would Tuesday the 15th be okay with people around this table? There's another meeting that Labour councillors might be involved in on Monday. Yeah, we can check that date, because obviously it's an all-member thing. So with regard to that, the overall process and timetable, are we happy to approve that with those flexibilities and that addition? Thank you. Okay, and part of the process of preparing for the budget is the annual survey. So proposed annual survey and consultation timetable. Is that you, Shane?
It is. Thank you, Chair. So again, this is very familiar. We're not doing any radical changes in terms of the approach that we're taking. I've had a couple of suggestions as to some things to add, which we will take on board. But the main thing really in respect of this is a couple of elements which vary each year, and one of those is the list of projects which we've undertaken in the last year, which we like to ask people about and what they think about. So one of those, I'd anticipated at this stage that the walkway from Foregate Street down to the river via the arches would be open. I'm not sure at this stage that it will be by the time the survey goes out, so I might have to change that wording to something like soon to be open walkway down the cycle route. But if there are any other things that members feel in the committee that we want to add into that, just to get a view from the public feel about them, then still time to do that. And otherwise, it is we try to keep the questions the same year after year, so that we can track progress and people can understand. Now, at the same time, you will also be aware that we're carrying out a consultation on the city plan, so that will give us some extra information as well, which will feed into this, particularly in terms of which of those 5 themes in the current city plan are the ones that people feel are still most relevant, or whether there are any changes around that. So I'll try and bring some of the feedback from that into the feedback from this survey. The results then get published in the February council report, so we can see how what people are saying across the city affects the decisions that we're making in terms of what's going in the budget. Again, any questions? Chair, I'm happy to take those.
Thank you. I think certainly having looked at the questions you're in at the moment, I would like to see some questions on active travel in there, because there's nothing about how people move through the city. So ease of getting around on foot or a bike, and then issues about pavement parking, block pavements, etc. to see, because those also affect partially sighted people or blind people who are moving around the city as well, that they can be getting in the way. So it would certainly be good to ask people how they get around and how they would like to travel and what their barriers are in the city. And I know I've raised 3D pie charts before to slightly blank looks, but I'm going to raise again that there is a 3D pie chart in the questions, and they are generally frowned upon in terms of presenting data, because the apparent size of the pie, or the slices of the pie, it doesn't match the actual size of the proportion of the pie. So that's a very minor point, but I'm going to keep raising 3D pie charts every time I mention them, I'm afraid.
Sorry, I'm not quite understanding. The pie's the wrong size, or the segments aren't accurate?
I'm happy to have the conversation probably outside the meeting, but getting into the vagaries of why 3D pie charts are, it's probably not suitable for this meeting, but I'm just going to mention them whenever I see one in a report.
I don't know whether Shane understands, but if we don't understand what you're saying, we can't correct it.
Sorry, Chair, we've discussed this outside of the meeting. I'm more than happy to go to a standard 2D pie chart. That's not straightforward. Okay, I understand the issue. It's straightforward. Don't worry. Okay. On the other point about whether we include some questions around active travel, I think that probably comes down to whether the committee is happy to include those. I'm not quite sure where we'll have to think about where we would put them, but if that's something that members are happy for me to add in a question around that, then I'm happy to do so. Questions about what's people's preferred mode of transport in the city?
I think it would need to be specifically linked to the active travel action plan. So, parking on pavements is nothing to do with it, which you mentioned, but Beryl Bikes is part of our active travel action plan. If there are some other things that explicitly linked to and come out of that, so there are some new pathways, for example, that have been built, developed as part of it. I think it's reasonable to ask a question that is specifically linked to what the City Council is doing with active travel.
Thank you, Chair. It's been a long month and I forgot how to use these things. Just worried about how this is the survey is going to be made available to people. So in 2.3, we've suggested that hard copies were made available at customer service centres, museums, leisure centres, community centres and on request. And yet I think there's a further paragraph that says, for this year, we're just going to make it primarily online with hard copies at the council buildings and on request, rather than at community centres and community partners. So is there a difference this year?
Thank you, Robin. No, I don't think so. I mean, I think community centres are classed as council buildings for the purposes of that. So it will be, there's no, we're not doing anything less in terms of making copies available than we have done in previous years. There's no change there. No.
I just think the final project, the 3-year plan for managing trees affected by ash dieback, is neither here nor there. It's not really happening. It's not an important project, and people won't even heard about it. I'd lose that and put something in more positive about parks and green spaces. As I understand it, the process for that's been quite diminished by Environment Committee. It's not as bad as we thought.
Yeah, is that the place where we put something in about active travel instead?
I think it's scope for something very specific. You've already got the walking and cycling route, and you've got Beryl bikes in those list of projects. So something specific, which we've done environmentally, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I suppose can I address that ash dieback? I think it's a project we ran as a city council. It's probably important to get the residents' view on it. It's considering the amount of time that we had spent on it. Although obviously the threat isn't as great as originally thought in terms of that, it's probably worth. And certainly in certain parts of the city, it's probably still quite important. So I just want the committee to just bear the weight of that in terms of that. So just on that point, the 2 points I wanted to make is there's a hell of a lot we deliver in the city that is covered with this, and considering the constrained financial positions that we're going to be finding ourselves in, is it important that the members of the public know what is a statutory function and what is a discretionary function? And because it really does highlight actually how much extra that we do in the city council over and top of that we're kind of legally and have to kind of deliver, which shows the amount of ambition and progress that we're kind of making. So that's just a general question to you, Chair, in terms of just putting it out there, because actually looking at this, how would the ordinary person filling this out know what actually is, what we're doing over and above what we're supposed to be kind of doing? And then I suppose the supplementary question to that is, in terms of, do we need, if there are other things that they want us to provide in terms of the ambition that we're showing to them, would they be willing to pay extra for them? It's a valid question. Would they, is that something that we should be asking our residents in terms of, if we're going over and above what we're supposed to be providing, do we need to ask them whether they're happy to pay a little bit extra? It's just a thank you.
Thank you. It's quite a big survey document. There are quite a lot of people who probably wouldn't go through all of that. I wondered how we were making it accessible to our minority communities in particular, and what we're intending to do about being inclusive.
Through you, Chair. Well, we have we've had various thoughts about how to do this over the years, haven't we, in terms of different ways. So some stages we've been out to community centres in person and talked to people that way. We publish copies in alternative languages. So we use the County Council's translation service to provide copies, I think, in 3 other languages as well. So those have become available. And you know, perhaps for the first time, we'll be able to use our new contact lists that we've got that Rob Burns developing for us. So a list of people who have asked for information about the council, so we can provide information through that means as well. So yeah, we try to find different ways of doing this every year, Pat, and it continues to be something we look at. I'm not sure that any of them so far have been entirely satisfactory. We keep trying to find different ways of doing it. But for example, when we've been out to community centres and arranged to be there and put out notice, we had very few people come along. So in terms of the cost of doing that versus the value we get from it. The other option is just to have as many sort of open commentary as well. So if people do want to just make remarks, then we try and leave spaces for things about suggestions or things that we could do things differently. That's part of that, trying to be inclusive as well, just to say, well, we're not just asking about what we want to know about, you tell us about what you want to know about. So there are a variety of ways in which we try and do it. So we continue to, happy to get suggestions as to what more we can do in terms of making it inclusive.
I just want to make a very quick comment on the inclusion of Ash Dieback plan. I realise that not in every constituency this would be very important, but I know that in some of the constituencies we represent, this was perceived as a very important issue. And even if it's not factually that as bad as we thought, it will be interesting to see what the perception is on that. So I will be quite keen to keep that on the survey.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of publicity about it, wasn't there, a year or so ago. And people may not have got the updates. I think it probably is worth continuing to include it. Karen?
Thank you, Chair. I'm just wondering how the projects were chosen, because obviously there are so many projects, aren't there, and so many good projects as well. I'm thinking about the trail alongside the river, the air quality monitors, the electric car charging in our car parks. And when we do so much, it's almost a shame to restrict it to one page. How did we choose like the exhibition at the Art Gallery over something else? Do you know, what process did we go through to choose these projects? Thank you.
Through you, Chair, we simply go through the committee decisions through the course of the year, look at the council decisions, look at what's gone through committee. So what do we do? So we restrict them to the current year. So sometimes we're dealing with stuff which people are only really recognising now, but which actually happened in the previous financial year. So they may well have been covered in the previous survey. So we go through that, and I think and then the first time we discuss that with yourselves is at the agenda planning meeting for this meeting, and then we open it up to that discussion here. So if there are other things that we think we should include, then I'm happy to look to include them. But as has already been remarked, there's quite a lot in there already. So it's a question. We've got a balance really between picking out things which, and also I do always try to knock out those ones which I don't think people will be aware of. So there are a lot of things that we do which are for specialist purpose or going to help a particular groups or individuals, but which generally across the city people won't necessarily be aware of. So we're just going to get a lot of answers. Don't know about this. And one of the things, in fact, why we started doing this in the first place was just to understand how much people did know. And we regularly get one or two of these projects which those who know about it like a lot, but we get a lot of don't know about scores as well, which tells us something about how we're publicising things and what we're trying to say. So it is a balance, Karen, between how many all the things we do and those keeping it reasonably succinct in terms of the survey. But I'm happy to include further things if you think there are other priorities or more important things.
Thank you, Chair. My comments really are more generally about the method that we're using for this data collection, because this kind of survey method is quite a sort of blunt instrument, in terms of the information that it gives us, and also the fact of it kind of being an annual survey rather than an ongoing survey, I think causes some of the issues that we're discussing, like how many projects should we put in and how many should we leave out, and so on. So, in my opinion, kind of continuous capture that feeds into an annual report of feedback, and using science-based methodologies would actually give us better information that we can use to make decisions, than kind of a standard sort of survey format. So my question really then is, what would a process look like, and how would that start for having a really sort of deep dive review of the methodology that we use to try to introduce techniques and methods that are kind of up to date and going to give us the information that we really need?
I don't know, Steve, what would be the process for starting that? I mean, I'd be happy to come and have a chat with you, and let's work out what we think might be
Not
the right-
proposing that should start with this, because obviously this would be far too late in the day to be kind of like revisiting this and looking at it, and you've mentioned the benefit of having the same questions year on year to make a comparison. So it's not a case that you throw the baby out with the bathwater sort of thing. So I'm kind of thinking really more for next year. So that is there some process? Is there a particular committee it should go through, or how might that look like for members to have a sort of a deeper dive into it?
Yeah, I understand, yes. So the process would be that we would bring a proposal in terms of how we might develop this survey to this committee, as this covers the wider. I mean, it primarily starts off as a survey for the budget. It's designed to part of our, it's the first stage, one of the first stages in getting some inputs into the budget setting process. But I'm happy to come and talk to you about the potential ways in which we might do it differently, in order to develop a programme which we could then bring to the committee and say, well, okay, how do we want to take this forward in the future? And that actually, of course, can form part of the project, the city plan consultation as well, which will give us a lot of ideas about how we might take our wider planning and strategic approach forward, which would feed into that too.
I guess it kind of begs the question, what is the information you say that is missing, or do you think the council needs that we don't have access to?
I think that certainly over the last year we've been noticing significant issues with our consultation process. I think a lot of members were unhappy with how the information that we got out of the pump track consultation, just as one example, and so there were questions raised about is that consultation process kind of fit for purpose, and so that's just one aspect of how we listen to residents. Members listen to residents on the doorstep, but also that, there are ways in which we can engage with our community differently to generate science-based information that can be used for budget and also planning decisions that we make, using other resources, for instance the schools and colleges, our university, and so on. But I say that would require a deep dive that wouldn't be appropriate kind of in this meeting, or necessarily in a committee meeting, until there's some kind of understanding of how that might happen and what the benefits might be of it.
Yeah, it sounds like quite a significant project that we'd have to kind of weigh up the benefits and the pros and cons. I think if you were able to express better what the significant gaps are and what that by fit, I'm a scientist by background. Yes, scientific research is hopefully more accurate, but I think it's not for debate now. What you are describing is a very significant project that would need to have some thought put to it. So what we're looking at is the recommendations for this draft survey. I think one or two thoughts that members around the table have shared. Whether there is another kind of active travel question, but we have got something there. Maybe the active travel team could look at. I think the statutory versus discretionary maybe would be quite tricky to put into this. I think it is something that we should give more thought to in terms of publicity actually in the new council now with the current administration, because some of us have seen and have sort of internalised the committee reports from the past. I think it is absolutely worth revisiting those and potentially, public publicity, about what those are, because it is quite an instructive list. So maybe if we could build that into the budget setting process, I think that would be useful and bears repetition. So on that basis, committee happy to approve the proposed annual survey and consultation timetable. Thank you very much. Thank you. Right. Item 7, energy saving measures at Purdyswell Leisure Centre and St Martin's Gate multi-storey car park. Is this you, Shane?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Unfortunately, my head of property can't be here with us tonight, but I'll do my best. The members previously discussed these two projects. One is for an extension of the existing solar panel array on St Martin's Gate, and the second is for an installation of an entirely new one on the roof of Purdyswell Leisure Centre. Since that previous decision, we've had more detailed cost estimates, and they've risen significantly. The one in respect of St Martin's Gate multi-storey car park has increased to the extent where the project now just about breaks even. As you can see under paragraph 3.3, we have a return on that investment of 0.5%. So from my point of view, that's very marginal and represents a significant risk. So what we're proposing in respect of that one is that we proceed with the planning permission to make sure that we can continue with the project, but we defer it until such a time as the business case is more robust in respect of that. As far as the one for the Purdyswell Leisure Centre, when we last met, I wasn't in a position to be able to say that we received or been allocated £154,750 to contribution to that project. So it was embargoed for publication at the time, but we have received that money. So that is a significant contribution to that project. And because of changes in terms of energy costs and so on, the return on that investment has increased significantly to about 11%. So the complication is there. Those costs are shown under paragraph 4.7. The complication with that is that investigations have shown that we need to do some work on the roof. And it's probably work that we would have had to do in the fullness of time anyway, but it's better to do it now and put the panels on rather than put the panels on, take them off, do the work and put them back on again. So that has caused a little bit of problem in terms of the grant, because it has to be spent by this April, by next April. So what we're proposing is a sort of couple of stages of that to complete the work in one area, do the re-roofing in the second area, and then complete the work on that. But that will be our cost element to it. Okay, but the net effect of that is to increase the capital programme. So we need to go to council to increase the capital programme to accommodate that. Okay, so in a nutshell, we want to proceed with the Purdyswell project and asking for an increased amount of capital to do that. and I'm proposing that we defer for the time being the works on St Martin's Gate until we have a better business proposition. I'll do my best to answer any detailed questions. Thank you, Chair.
Open to questions and comments, but not too technical. Seen Karen's hand first.
Thank you, Chair. I was wondering if 3-2 St Martin's Gate, we've got these feasibility costs. How much of that costs would we have to revisit when if we were to delay the project and come back? How much of that, you know, is it just a case of then adjusting, oh, will that be a significant respend on that with the consultant? And I also wondered if we'd looked at all, I mean, Sports England have been very generous with their grant. Is there any form of grant funding that could be applied for? Have we looked for grant funding? I assume we probably have, but is it, you know, it's you know, greening up your council. It's, you know, is there anything we could look at for that? And then 3-5, which is a little bit more complicated. We've mentioned that the cost of the project would be considerably reduced if we chose to close off the top deck of the car park, so we didn't have to put them on the steel portal frames. I've been up there, I've used that car park, and I have thought to myself they didn't look incredibly sturdy. Strong winds or somebody backed into them or something like that, which could damage the solar panels. Could we have that as a costed option, closing off that top deck, and what impact that would have? You know, would we be able to get more panels on? Would we get more efficiency? Would it be cheaper to maintain? And we haven't really got that as a figure. So that would be, you know, you've said we could do it, but we don't actually know how that would cost out. And do we have any idea how much the electricity would have to go up, or we'd have to save costs? Do we have an idea of that when we could see this back? You know, what are we saying? 6 months we can look at it again, or are we saying it's disappearing into the distance? I'd like to think that it's not disappearing into the distance, because I'd really like to see us exploiting this solar opportunity and for the car park, and maybe running the entire car park perhaps a little bit more off these solar panels.
To you, Chair. That's right. So in terms of the alternative funding, yes, there are pots of funding around. We've been successful in attracting quite a bit for a number of these projects, so that's something we can continue to do. I mean, I suppose there is a little bit of, well, you know, it was a reasonably marginal project before, but let's go ahead, and since the price came back, it was, well, you know, we really can't go ahead on that basis. But I'll be guided by the committee in terms of whether or not this is something we leave until such a time as electricity price changes significantly, or the market changes, or if you want us to go and look at alternative ways of delivering, you know, the project, one of which is, yes, to not have the scaffolding. I mean, the top part of the car park tends to be only ostensibly used at Christmas time, so most of the year. So it's arguable that we wouldn't be losing much by way of parking spaces. So that is certainly something that we could look at. But, you know, if the committee is of a mind that it wants to proceed, we will go and have a look at an alternative arrangements and see if we can do something that stacks up by way of a business case. You know, within the 6 months that you've suggested, Karen. I don't know whether that's an appropriate timeline. I'd need to speak to Kevin in detail about the work that's needed to do that.
It wouldn't cost the city too much to do that project. Okay. Yeah, I would be quite interested if the committee would like to support that.
Thank you. I think I'm agreeing with Karen that I think I would like to see this proceeding, but I do have some detailed questions. So obviously there are EV chargers in the car park at the moment. Are they currently, do they receive power from the solar panels already installed there, and will they receive power from this? Secondly, maybe this was in an earlier report when this was originally considered, but the report that we have at the moment doesn't mention how many panels and what, you know, how many panels there are. Basically, it only mentions the gross generation, but doesn't say what sort of size grid we are looking at installing. So if you've got any information about that, that would be good. And yeah, I think the business case as it's presented, obviously it presents the current electricity prices, but I don't think electricity prices will stay where they are for the next 25 years, which I might talk a bit more later if there's further discussion on it. So yeah, those are my two main questions.
Through you, Chair. So yes, the EV chargers, they do receive power from the panel, so they're fed into the main grid there within the centre. So they supply that and the lighting and other electricity uses for the car park. I'll get back to you in terms of this total size of the grid. I mean, obviously we want to get as much on there as we can. If we're going to do that, then let's maximise the potential. But again, you know, if we were to reduce that, then there'd be certainly a gain in terms of reduced emissions, but perhaps not quite so much, but something which is viable in terms of cost. So that's something that we want to look at. I'll ask Kevin to send some details around on that. Electricity prices, well, that is one of the reasons why it now suddenly seems very risky, because that's an area which is quite volatile. So yes, they could go up, which would make the business case stack up better, but equally, currently they're going down. So it would make the business case worse. So part of what is in the consideration there is that degree of risk. You know, if we get to a position in a few months' time when things look more stable, then then it becomes, the risk aspect goes down and the project becomes more attractive again. So altogether, what the report is just saying is that on the basis of what we agreed before, we don't think we can proceed now, given where we are with the current arrangements. Happy to go ahead and have a look at alternative arrangements, but not to go with the project we had previously. So that's in essence the recommendation. Let's consider all those variables, look at other ways in which we can make it a better business case, de-risk it in that sense, and then come back to committee with that proposal. In the meantime, pursue the planning.
Thank you. I've gone on a bit of a journey on this one myself, because it is one hell of a lot of money. It's over £661,000. And I've got a question, but what I really would like to see is for us tonight is to go for a proposal which is that we go ahead with it, but with some value engineering and some project work to try to get the cost down, possibly by not having them on top of a lot of steel work. Obviously the embedded carbon would be less and the whole cost of the project would be less. So that's what the direction I would like to see this going. But I've got a couple of questions, but first of all, I think one of the things we've really got to keep in mind is that we have declared a climate emergency, and we've seen climate change affecting us now here in Worcester and elsewhere around the country, and it's happening here and now. So I was just looking at in Bangladesh, they've actually had 71 people die in floods recently. Only a week or two ago, we saw a whole lot of smoke and clouds coming across from the fires in Canada. So I think we've really got to keep that in mind. But and I think there are two, really big concerns that we need to be really careful about, and that is the effect on the revenue budget of this council. We know we've got to do savings, but one of the questions I've got for Shane is that if we go ahead with this project, obviously I hear what you say about the risk, but the cost of the electricity is just about going to pay for the cost of the interest and repaying the loan. So I'd like you to confirm to us that there will actually be no on cost to this city council, because it is cost neutral, basically. That's the first question. And the second question is that I know we've had a lot of discussion, I know we'll have discussions in the future about other investments like Scala and other things as well. And I think we've really got to be careful that we don't overburden the council with debt. So the other question I'd like you to answer, Shane, is in terms of our headroom and our core spending power, can you give us a comment on how our current debt levels in this city council compare to other local authorities, and about that level of risk and what your feeling is on that risk and our ability to manage that core spending power to be able to make sure that that debt level is within reasonable limits. Those are my two questions.
Through you, Chair. So, in terms of cost neutrality, yes, I mean, the project shows a break-even of 0.5%, so, you know, overall. But the thing to remember, of course, is that there is upfront investment. So we'll need to borrow, we'll need to actually pay for that. And so it'll be some time before we recover the cost of that. So I don't know what the payback time is in years, but, you know, in the fullness of time, that it will pay for itself. As soon as you know, it starts generating savings, and those savings are available to offset the revenue costs in interest and minimum revenue provision that we'll have to make. And so it shouldn't have an immediate impact. But it's very marginal, so if it changes one way or another, then that could have a significant effect. In terms of our overall debt position, we'll talk later in the performance report about the off-log indicators, which show what we already know, that we're compared to our nearest neighbours, we have a relatively low level of debt, and the revenue burden of that is relatively low compared to them. If you look at district councils across England as a whole, we're above the benchmark for district councils in terms of the impact, the revenue impact. So I'm very wary about looking at what other councils are doing and trying to use that to benchmark our position. From my point of view, we need to think about what our medium-term financial plan says, and if we are contributing to that by additional borrowing and increased revenue costs, then what are we going to do less of in order to accommodate that, or where are we going to generate alternative income, and so on. So, you know, purely in terms of these being cost neutral or a net benefit to the council, then they're not going to have an impact on our revenues and our reserves, you know, all things being equal. The decision just comes down to, is it marginal in terms of the risk of the individual project? And that's the consideration that we always have. Now, in order to get as close to that as possible, our risk appetite says that these investment decisions should bring a positive return over the lifetime of the project. That they should make a return within 5 years to the medium-term financial plan, and that they should be positive under best, worst and normal case scenarios. So that 0.5% would represent the normal case. We could get a better case if we do the project slightly differently, which will bring it in. But as things stand, under a worst case scenario, it would lose money because the costs would go up or the electricity prices would come down and we wouldn't generate the savings. So on that basis, you know, I would recommend going forward on it. I think without doing, you know, let's move the case so that we can get all three of those scenarios into the right place, and then that's the point where we progress. But I would run shy of trying to compare our level of debt with other councils. What matters is the level of debt to us in terms of our medium-term financial plan. And let's not forget we're due to increase our borrowing by another 10 million or so over the next 5 years in the medium-term financial plan. So that's something that we have to keep an eye on. And looking at overall interest rates, of course, as well. So there are a lot of factors to take into account there, Louis. So on balance, that's why the recommendation is that we don't proceed at this stage with the project as it stands.
Thank you. John.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, obviously, I admire the intention and what we're trying to achieve in terms of net zero, but obviously, the current circumstances, as you've explained, Shane, don't lend us to that. However, you know, we don't want to completely rule it out, and I think there is a case of obviously re-looking at it at some point or re-engineering it in terms of making it work. But I mean, the point I wanted to just pick up on in terms of St Martin's Gate is that actually we've got a whole Shrub Hill park plan coming forward in the next 10 to 15 years. We've got parking issues in and around the city centre and local residents. Why would we want to wipe a floor off of our car park to dedicate to solely in terms of that? If our ambition as a city is to increase increase the high street, then we have to do however much we improve the public realm and active travel plan in terms of that, we do have to factor in a certain amount of obviously usage of our car parks into that. So why would we cut a whole floor of a car park that potentially give us the income, potentially provide a solution for local residents parking? It just doesn't make sense in terms of what we're trying to achieve and the future plans that we've got in and around the area. in terms of that. So I would be hesitant in terms of, you know, just dedicating a whole floor, just in losing a floor in terms of that. Obviously, the existing solutions that we've got in terms of on stilts and on a frame seem more, although they're more costly, they still reserve some parking towards it. I mean, in terms of the case itself, I think, you know, it kind of speaks for itself. It's an ambition we'd like to have, but we don't want to overburden ourselves in the current financial climate. If there is a better way to do it and the circumstances improve, I'll happily consider the St Martin's Gate at a later stage. In terms of the part two of this, the Purdiswell one, I think one of the questions was around the re-roofing of the flat spaces and the additional cost. It's easier to bear that cost now than to obviously re-repair the roof when maintenance comes. Can you explain a little bit more the costing around that, please?
I think that's one I will have to come back to with a written response, Chairman, in terms of the actual costs that are involved in that. I mean, the estimate is around 300,000, I think, in terms of what it would cost to do the roof work, hence the extra element required in the capital. The other slight dimension to this is the nature of that work is we have to ensure that it does amount to capital works and isn't actually a revenue cost, which would be a normal maintenance type activity. So there is a further piece of work that we need to do to absolutely be clear about that as well. So we'll come back to in terms of what that element that means. The real key point about that is trying to find a way in which we can ensure that we can use the grant within the term. So we've had quite a lot of discussions with Sports England about that, and we think we've got a solution by which we can use their grant and get the roof works done in a way which maximises the value. So I'll come back to you in terms of what those details of costs are in terms of doing the roof.
Thank you, Chair. I completely agree with Jabber about the need to maintain as much car parking as we can in the existing car park at St Martin's. Now, I wanted to talk about the sum of money which we would be proposing to, or whether we're deferring, to invest in carbon saving, and which is basically what it is, and to generate a return. It's a significant amount of money, and I would say during the period of deferment, we'd ask officers to investigate whether that investment can be made better in more efficient, more cost-effective ways of saving carbon and generating better returns. Two things on it. It's a significant amount of money when there's no gearing implied in terms of match funding from the private sector. And secondly, there's a lot of easier places where you can install photovoltaic cells than on the difficult roof of a city centre building. And it still feeds in. It doesn't have any direct benefit for that building. It goes into the grid as a whole. So it doesn't matter where it is. It could be on a bank of unused land facing south, which could allow biodiversity to flourish underneath this photovoltaic cells and quite simple mounting. So I would say, let's look at our land opportunities, let's look at insulation of existing and other buildings, and let's see what we can really buy with this amount of money in terms of carbon saving.
Thank you, Chair. I'm aware that there's been lots of work by the property team looking into the energy saving across our property and our buildings. And buildings such as this are extremely hard to make more energy efficient. And I would say that our car parks and places like Purdiswell are brilliant opportunities for us. I'm really pleased to see Purdiswell. I saw today that the Lerwick have got their scaffolding up and their solar panels are going on. And of course, we saw loads of swimming pools closed down in recent years, so this is really important for Purdiswell. But I see a flat car park as a real opportunity. I don't think you'll get a project that's more simple. And actually, if you take away the framework, which has got carbon in the steel in it, you've got a potential huge saving and making the cost of the project much easier. It's 49 tonnes a year. That's 4 tonnes of carbon a month. Every month that we delay it is more tonnes. Now, I'm at home turning off my plugs and turning off my screen to save electricity. And, you know, we're expecting people to take personal responsibility in their homes. We are the council who are taking responsibility for the whole city, and what happens. And every city in the country, if we all do that, will make a difference across the country. It has to be collective responsibility. For me, why don't we amend this and leave it to the chair and vice chair to look at the proposals from the property team of taking away the frame and trusting you, Shane, to see whether it then becomes a project that is got enough reduced risk that you can go ahead of it. Because I trust you, Lynn, I trust you, Jalba, and I trust you, Louis, as our leader and our vice chair, and Jessie as well. Yeah, and Jessie, I trust you all. Are you the vice chair as well? Brilliant. Just go. I just think, let's not delay it. And if that's the difference that we need to make to this project, let's just get it done. Don't delay it by 6 months.
Is that a formal amendment?
I would make that a formal amendment. I think, you know, I get really frustrated. I think the problem is, I think the public will look at this and they'll say, why is the public sector so slow? Why does everything take so long? Because that's the perception, isn't it? And actually, you couldn't really have a more simple project, could you? It's an existing building on a flat thing. Now, I have been involved in the car parks with the Environment Committee. That floor is hardly ever used, and what they know in that building is that women do not like the upper floors on that car park. People do not necessarily feel safe on the upper floors. It's not the best floor to have. And actually downstairs is where we've got the electric car charging. That is doing really well, and the potential to put more car charging in there is something that we can look to in the future, and then we could use more of the solar panels within that car park. Yes, the car parking is really important, but the top floor is not for disabled people and it isn't for women. And to me, that's a priority as well. Thank you.
Yeah, I would actually query this loss of car. I'd like to understand how this loss of car park income due to the reduction in bays came to those figures of 6688 comes from, because I will use the top deck of that car park, and what I notice is that as you're going up, people are parked in the middle of the 3 bays between the concrete, because they don't want to park next to the concrete post, and you'll go over layer of that car park. You'll see it's got one car in the middle of each bay, because it's convenient to park in that one, and you haven't actually efficiently filled your car park. So if you lost the top deck, people would then start parking in that lower, sort of like, I think it's something like 4 and 5. It might even be 6. But you know, you see them at the bottom deck. They tend to be full because people will take the time to park in that because they want to use the little bridge that's going over. But you know, yeah, as you get to the higher levels, we'll get to sort of like level 4, and I'll just go. yeah.
We don't have the data. We
don't. That's what I'm saying. We do
not
not have the. I don't feel we have enough information here to come to a firm answer, and we could reduce our maintenance costs.
Okay, we need to move on. I've got Alex wants to come in again, and Jessie, and then I think we need to wrap up.
Well, I just wanted to, is there an amendment for, because I would wanted to speak in support of an amendment to do as Karen says, to move forward and put it with the chairs and vice chairs. So,
Well, an amendment's been suggested. If someone wants to second that amendment.
I'm happy to second it.
Well, perhaps we need to clarify what the amendment is.
It would be to point 1.1. So instead of approving the deferment, it's actually to approve the project, but with the chair and vice chair reviewing the proposals from the officers for a more efficient, cost-effective scheme or something like that. You know, looking basically at removing the framework. And then within that as well, you could go back to Gareth and say, can we have the data for the car parking as well, please? Because he'll have it. He'll know it.
If I may, Chair, I'm struggling to see the difference. All I'm suggesting in that recommendation is that we don't go ahead with the project as it's currently set up.
I think it's because a deferment is a bit like Karen was saying, 6 months. You know, I think if you do it with the chair and vice chair, you might be able to do it a bit quicker. That's what I'm thinking.
I suppose I'm slightly wary in, it is actually about the scale of investment, and the reason that the public sector does things slowly is because we are spending public money. I absolutely would love to say, yes, I think these are all great projects. We've already put some solar panels on St Martin's Gate. The business case doesn't currently fully stack up, and we don't know what is coming down the line. Clearly there is a need for more information, so there might be more detail and a review of the options. So that is already there, isn't it, within the recommendation? So deferment, we can add for further information. What I would potentially suggest is that we actually build it into budget setting for next year. So the budget setting process, and then we can weigh up the cost of this project vis-a-vis the other capital items, the other revenue streams, and what funding we might have from central government at that point in time. So if I can suggest that, so defer for further information and to build into the budget setting process for next year. I suppose I've made Shane's feedback to Karen's amendment was that actually it's kind of it's not adding any different value to what is the recommendation before us. So my suggested amendment is specifically asking for more information and building it into budget setting. So is there support for that?
Thank you, Chair. I'm kind of, yes, supportive of the amendment that you've suggested, primarily because it puts a time bound on the deferment. And as much as Councillor Lawrence, sorry Karen, I try and get people's names right at least once a month, may trust the chairs and vice chairs of the committee, but I think the committee need to make the decision, not the chairs and vice chairs.
Yes. So we're somewhere in between, actually, the two amendments. What we were going to suggest is that on 1.1, to approve the deferment of the project until a new proposal can come to this committee at the next committee. So that's a shorter time period. Voted publicly because it's public money, but not a very long deferment until next year, so that we can properly consider it, because it doesn't sound like we have all of the information and we have a new proposal. But I don't know if that would be acceptable.
Yeah, Chair, can I just check, because the next meeting is the 26th September, isn't it? So it won't be that one, will it? No. So when's the one after that?
November, that's fine.
That would be fine, yeah.
So the proposed. So we need to discuss the formally proposed amendment, and then vote on that, and then take the main issue. So as I understand it, the formally proposed amendment is the pre-tender estimate, the previously approved photovoltaic array at St Martin's Gate multi-storey car park, and defer the decision until the November meeting of the committee. To allow further work to be done. Yeah. Okay, so you're happy with that as a form? Right, so then we need to take a vote on that.
So for people clear, so that's an amendment to get further information and bring it back to November's P&R. All those in favour of that? Hurrah! Against? Are you against or late? with one abstention.
So now we return to the main motion.
Which is the recommendations around Purdyswell Leisure Centre. And I think it's a huge shame, actually, that we've spent, if you like, so much of this meeting talking about St Martin's Gate, because the investment and the project for Purdyswell is much bigger, is much more important, and it's actually fundamental to this city being able to continue with actually having a swimming pool. You know, many local councils, because of the cost of energy, because of the difficulty in maintaining swimming pools, they have gone and they have lost those. So I hope, I'm sure we will be approving it, but, you know, huge gratitude to Sport England and to our staff that have gone out and successfully got that bid and brought that money into the council. And credit, you know, to Freedom Leisure and the opportunity and getting solar panels on Purdyswell Leisure Centre, because, as I say, that is going to be, you know, a long-term, absolute good payback, both in terms of the finances and in terms of our carbon footprint, because the energy use on the Purdyswell site is significantly much more than on St Martin's Gate. And there are recommendations within it. Julian, did you want me to read them all out? Are people happy to take them a vote on block? Because there are sections within it. So reading out for the sake of the tape and the video and those watching at home. So recommendation 1.2, to approve the outline business case for the installation of a roof-mounted photovoltaic panel array at Purdyswell Leisure Centre, including the grant of £195,750 from the Sport England Swimming Pool Assistance Fund for this project. Recommend to Council an increased allocation of £154,750 to the existing capital programme for energy saving measures. Delegate the award of a works contract for the Purdyswell Leisure Centre works to the Corporate Director, Finance and Resources, subject to there being no material deviation in the final business case post-tender, and approve the outline business case for the installation of destratification fans at Purdyswell Leisure Centre, and to investigate this further, and recommend to Council a capital allocation of £45,000 for energy saving measures for those fans. All those in favour of those recommendations? Thank you. That is passed. Can I suggest a short comfort break? 10 minutes? Ta-da!
Thank you, Chair. So this report sets out the forecast for the year end as at the end of the first quarter, the end of June. If you cast your mind back to when we set the budget for this year back in February, we had at the time, as paragraph 3.1 notes, a gap, a budget deficit of 388,000. This forecast suggests that we will now have a surplus against that balanced budget of 148,000. In essence, this means that we won't need now to draw the 388,000 from reserves, but instead the lower figure of 240,000, hence the variance of 148. If you look then at Appendix 1, that summarises the key parts of the variance that make up that 148,000. And I'll just talk briefly about the key figures within that. As ever, housing benefit subsidy is a challenge for us. And the 400,000 variance there is consistent with the previous years. You might recall when we set the budget that we reduced relaxed the budget that we're expecting on that by 100,000, and hence we have a slightly improved variance compared to previous years. But it continues to be one of the challenges we face. On a more positive note, if you look halfway down the sheet in terms of salaries, we've got two positive variances there. First of all, the pay settlement, the current offer that's on the table is lower than the budget, which assumed a 5% increase, hence that potential cost reduction of 311,000. And we're carrying a number of vacancies that will ultimately lead to replacements, but there tends to be a gap between a person leaving and the new person starting, hence that reduction there of 123. In terms of interest receivable and payable, at the time we did the budget, we were expecting interest rates to gradually reduce this year. That has started to happen. The base rate has been reduced, but that timing and the forecast on interest rates for the rest of the year is better than we were assuming in the budget, hence the improvement there of 249,000. Towards the top, we have several variances on income, some better in terms of trade and garden waste collection, for example, but equally challenges we face in terms of planning income and on bereavement services. The report itself contains a lot of detail that I won't take you through at this stage. I'll assume that that's been read, but I would just draw your attention to the collection of council tax and business rates. Over the last 2 or 3 years, that has also been a challenge for us, partly due to the pandemic, but I'm pleased to report that for the current year, albeit only 3 months in, the collection of council tax is ahead of where we would expect to be, and business rates is only slightly behind at 0.3%. If we were to go back to last year and the year before, that's a considerable improvement, which is positive. On that note, Chair, I'll stop and be happy to take any questions.
And Robin?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the report. It's great news on the gap. Can we just talk about write-offs? So I note from this year that the write-offs have been the highest that they've been for the last 5 years or so. I'm just wondering if we could get some kind of breakdown over the cause of those write-offs or the justification for those write-offs in some shape or form. And I also, we're supposed to sign off or approve rather 45 grand's worth of write-offs in this committee. It may be me, but I think I've missed the detail on those write-offs, and I understand it may be sensitive information, but I don't understand how we can write something off if we don't understand what it is we're writing off. Thank you.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. If I refer you to paragraph 8.3, which is underneath the tables of council tax and business rates and the write-offs, and I'll just briefly run through that paragraph for clarity. That the proposed write-off for Q1 is 163,000. That includes 57,000 from 75 separate cases, which have all been approved by the shared service management. So individually, those are all less than £1,000 as an average. There's then 61,000 from 16 cases, which have been approved by the Section 151 officer, so Shane. And then, as you mentioned, 45,000 from 4 cases that require approval of this committee. Of the total 163,000, insolvency accounts for 111,000 of that. If your question is, what's the detail behind the 4 cases? I haven't got those in the report. I could potentially find that and provide that for you. But you're absolutely right, from a confidentiality point of view, we can't then disclose who the individual companies or council taxpayers are behind those.
Right. I should have done my mental maths before. That's my fault. Thank you for that. Yeah, and I understand you wouldn't be able to tell us the detail, the actual, you know, the people or the companies involved in the 45k, but it would be good to justify the write-offs, wouldn't it?
I mean, in terms of pursuing them, I guess that it kind of applies overall, doesn't it, to the 163k? Have these been debts that have been written off been pursued to the nth degree, or what? I guess an understanding of the process of, is this the end of the line and we have written it off, or there might still be the possibility of collecting something?
So yeah, again, through you, Chair. I've used the opportunity of a couple of minutes there to open the file that the Revenue Benefit Service provided us with, and I can confirm that the 45,000 that the committee is being asked to write off now is indeed 4 cases of insolvency.
Through you, Chair, just to add, you know, the general principle with insolvency cases, yes, we go through a process of determining what we can recover, but in many of those cases, we often find ourselves fairly low down in the list of the organisations which will benefit from any money which is recovered during the insolvency process. So, experience has suggested that we're unlikely to collect anything from those insolvency cases. So we take the view that if we are fortunate in receiving some returns from the liquidation, then that's a bonus which comes into the accounts to us.
Yeah, thank you very much for the report. It's very interesting reading. I think my one question is on the year-end cost pressures and risks. IT licenses. So it says the cost prices from Microsoft has increased by 20%. Can I get some clarity on whether that's 20% on existing licenses that we already had and we are renewing? And if so, is there any kind of negotiation process or anything we look at, or do we just have to take like cost increases like that without any kind of way of mitigating them? Because obviously we have increased our use of Microsoft stuff a lot with the move to Microsoft 365.
Through you, Jay, it is the former, yes. It's not that we've got more licenses or we're doing more things, it's the price that's gone up. So there was quite an exercise during the course of last year to find ways in which we could reduce the number of licenses we have. So there are specialist bits of software that some people use. There are accounts which are haven't been used for some while because the nature of the person's work means that they're not necessarily using a laptop during the course of the day, so we go through that exercise. But we're all in the same position. Yes, we moved to Microsoft Office 365, and we are in a position where we've got to accept the costs which come forward, because you know, it's not as if we can really look for an alternative supplier in the event that those are going up. Now, the chair of the committee forwarded to me an email yesterday, which was in relation to work that the Local Government Association is doing to try and negotiate prices across local government in the country, rather than individual council having their own price. We do benefit from having 3 authorities in the one contract, so we get some value from that because it's a shared service across the 3 authorities. But for the most part, yeah, we do what we can to try and minimise the licence cost, but ultimately we have little control over that.
Thank you, Chair. I was looking at the bottom of page 51, 4.3 at the vacancies, and having looked at Appendix 6, I'm not much clearer about the idea. What I was concerned about is how much recruitment drag have we got? Have we got a certain amount of that?
Hang on. Through you, Chair. I think Appendix 1 shows that the vacancies element of the forecast is 123,000, which in itself is a considerable amount of money, but we need to put that against the annual salaries budget, which is significantly more than that. So if I go to the next page, annual salaries budget is 14.5 million. So the 123 is actually quite a small variance of that. And to the best of my knowledge, I don't think we have any long-term vacancies that generating that. It's more about the ongoing effect of somebody handing their notice in. They leave at the end of the month, but it might take us 2 or 3 months by the time we've recruited, interviewed, and the new recruiters work their notice period.
Thanks. I think what I was concerned about is that we're not missing any essential posts there, or that it's not affecting us too much.
I don't believe so.
Yeah, thank you. Just regarding Appendix 9, on there, could we, there's a Lobo loan of £5 million, which was taken out in 2004. We're keen to understand, because probably none of us around the table were around at that time. Do we know what that loan was for and what the so that's the first question.
Okay, the Lobo loan was taken out many years ago, certainly long before my time, and it's something that was common at the time, but hasn't been replicated as a means of borrowing since. It's unusual in the sense that the interest rate is fixed, but the terms are that if the market interest rate changes, then the lender has the opportunity to recall the loan back. But with the low interest rates we've had over the last few years, and there's been no incentive for anybody to do that. And with rates now starting to come back down again, it's unlikely that again that would happen. And I think it's the length of it is I can't see it on here. It's a long-term loan.
Second question is that, do we know which fund of the BlackRock that we're investing in?
When you say which fund?
So I'm assuming it's BlackRock is the company, but there must be a fund that we've invested in BlackRock.
I don't have any more details to hand on that. I mean, it's the BlackRock Heritage Fund. Yeah, that's the name of it. That's what the Appendix 9 refers to. If you want more details, then I can provide that.
Thank you, Chair. I just have a question regarding a potential changes that we might see shortly. I understand that we were in a very fortunate position at the beginning of this year of having to draw less from the reserves because there was an underspend on a number of things that we had budgeted for, particularly employee cost, which came under budget of what we had thought. But I also understand that central government is doing a review of expenditure and that there might be some negotiations with unions. What do you think might be the impact of that review? What kind of risk should we be prepared for?
Jesse, in terms of the salaries, so the position that when we set the budget in February, we allowed about 6% for an increase in salaries. And that's the latest offer that has been put on the table is, on average, about half of that. So the medium-term financial plan, which we're projecting at the moment, has taken that into account. So that's reduced that gap that we had, which was about 1.3 million to about 700 for next year. And has contributed to that salaries underspend, which is being shown there. So that's the impact of that. So it would take another 3% to bring that back down by that remaining gap of about 500,000, which we're currently showing.
But it's unlikely to go down.
No, it's unlikely to be less than the offer that's on the table at the moment. I mean, the process over the last 2 years' experience has been that the employers have made an offer, the unions have considered that, discussed with their members whether or not they want to accept the offer, and ultimately have agreed it. So we're pretty confident that the offer that's on at the table at the moment will be the one that's agreed at the end of the month. But that's for this current year. Negotiations for the future year in terms of the budget are, well, they will take place sometime ahead.
So is it fair to say that we could be in a position that if there are new negotiations under the new government, that we might have a larger gap than the one we have now?
That's correct, yeah.
I mean, just as a point of kind of accuracy, is it the government or it's West Midlands employers? Who actually is the negotiating body, if you see what I mean, for our staff?
Yeah, there's a national group which involves people like the local government association and the various employment, like West Midlands employers around the country. So it's a group of people who act on behalf of councils as a negotiating group, and we don't have to follow their recommendations, but the committee has decided a couple of years ago that we'd return to a position where our national pay scales were the same as that negotiating body, so we will probably go with their recommendation.
Any other questions or comments? I can just say thank you to officers. You know, there's, as always, there is a huge amount of effort and work behind this. It's pleasing and hopeful that for the first quarter of the year, things are looking relatively positive, but it is very early in the year, which is always the warning sign, and a great deal to happen in the next 9 months or so. But thank you for the report. So in terms of recommendations, committee reviews the financial monitoring details, including budget variances and performance indicators for the first quarter ended the 30th of June, and the committee approves the write-offs of £45,000 of council tax and business rates for the quarter. All those in agreement with those recommendations? Thank you. So next we have the Q1 performance report.
Thank you, Chair. This is our first performance report for this year. It looks slightly different. I'll explain why in a minute, but just to run through the highlights. Energy savings capital investment, sorry, we're on page 79. The energy saving capital investment project we've discussed today, so there's some slight delays in respect to that. The budget gap reduction is showing as red at the moment, and Mark's just talking the reasons why that won't turn green until we close that budget gap. And then the other one, which is red on the indicators, is the number of days to process new council tax support claims. So these have taken a significant downturn in the last quarter, and something that we discussed at length at the management board last week, and we put in place a process for addressing that backlog. A lot of it is to do with correspondence. There's a significant backlog of correspondence which needs to be dealt with. So we put in place the usual process for dealing with the backlog, some additional resources transferred from somewhere else. We'll deal with the older ones first and make sure we can catch up. And we've asked for that to be to get ourselves back onto the recommended processing time by December. So in the next quarter two report, we should see that returned to back to where it should be. In terms of this, so the bit that's different is the off-log metric. So you'll recall the discussion we had at the last meeting. With the Office for Local Government is publishing information about councils. So we want to be ahead of that game. We want to understand where we are with that. Some of them relate to household waste and for planning, and those are for consideration of those committees. They're only included here for information, so I'm not proposing there's any discussion around those. They're just for completeness. This is what off-log are reporting. But the finance ones, what I've tried to do is express these in a slightly different way. So if you look at the indicators from page 95 onwards, the one at the bottom there, general fund reserves as a percentage of net revenue expenditure. So what they do is show the latest information presented about Worcester by Oflog. So that's the one on the left, which is purple on my colour one here. So for instance, that one shows in 21-22, our general fund reserves were at 115% of net revenue expenditure, which is a healthy enough position. And the median, which is the nearest neighbours, so comparable authorities to ours, is the one in the middle. So we're compared to those quite well. But since then, our position has improved slightly. So what I've tried to do with these ones is show in the third column what the current position is, so you get a sense of what our direction of travel is since 2021. I won't go into any details about those. I'm happy to have a discussion outside the committee with anyone who's interested in these elements of what they're trying to do. But what they tell us, and what we already know, is that our level of debt is relatively low compared to our similar authorities. Our level of reserves is relatively low, but not dramatically so. Our total core spending power is lower than most of our neighbouring authorities. So we get less money from government than some of our comparable councils. Our council tax rates are about the same as you would expect them to be. And on the whole, it reflects what is our understanding of the position of the council. Things haven't changed all that much over the past couple of years, since 2021-22. But in some cases, our position has improved slightly against our nearest neighbours. On the whole, it gives us a picture which is, reasonably secure. I don't think there's no alarm bells ringing from the off-log data.
Thank you very much. I do think the off-log is one of the legacies of Michael Gove, isn't it? That this set of metrics are how local government should be judged, and it just feels a rather reductionist view when we think of the whole scope of what councils provide, and it kind of comes back to the statutory versus discretionary. There's so much that we do for our communities that is not measured here, that doesn't fit on a bar chart. We are more than just the money, the waste stream and the planning applications. And we absolutely are. And I mean, with regard to the sort of debt levels and the reserve levels, it also, I mean, if I can kind of ask the question, averages are problematic just because the median, just because other councils have more debt doesn't necessarily mean that's something to aspire to, I guess, because we are aware of councils that are on the verge of going bust, and their metrics are potentially in here as well.
Indeed, and one of the issues about this is that if they've got a great deal of borrowing, but if they're generating income significantly in excess of the costs of borrowing, then they're in a much better position, even though they appear to be very exposed compared to an authority which may have a very low level of debt, but which isn't generating income from that, and is therefore in a worse revenue position. So, what somebody said the other day, that a statistic is like a ventriloquist dummy. You can say whatever you like. Eventually, you can make it say what you want to.
Thank you.
Yes, exactly. I left out that bit, David.
Louis.
Two questions. On page 79, there's like a summary table there. It's got the different types of RAG symbols. I was just a bit confused. It's obviously because of these off-log things, but you've got red, amber, triangle, a green tick. You've got that symbol which is like a picture of a graph. What is that meant to do, and what is that telling us? What type of RAG is that? I've never seen that before. And my other question is on page 91. It was covered in chairs and vice chairs briefing, but I can't quite remember what you said, so I'm going to ask it again. On page 91, the budget gap, it's aimed to maximise, and this is budget cap reduction. So is it aimed to maximise or aimed to minimise the budget gap?
Sorry, through you, Chair. We would want the budget gap to be positive. We would like the gap between our budget and our actual costs to be positive. So we're looking to maximise the positive budget gap. You can read it the other way around if you wish, but yeah, one way or another, we're looking to end up with a positive variance against the budget. So yes, we're looking to minimise the budget gap. Obviously, yes. Okay. So we'll just change the wording. I think might be the easiest option. Yeah,
okay. But the other thing is about the symbols. Could you just explain why some of them have got a little graph?
The little graph symbol means that there is no target. So we're not comparing it against the target. So that's why it's not.
There's no target. Then
just for information.
Information only. Right. Thank you.
It's getting a bit late, isn't it? Yeah, the summary page indicates there's a lot going on, as we are well aware. Now, customer service is well done. Is it important to people? I just hope the calls answered within 90 seconds. We did have the debate. Does that just mean that the answer phone picked up, or was it actually properly answered?
Answered by humans.
Wow, answered by humans is always better. Thank you. So is committee happy to note this is the annual performance report, or the performance report for Q1? Note the performance report in front of us anyway. Thank you. Treasury Management annual report. So for the financial year that we have completed.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the Treasury Management report for the year that finished last 31st of March. It is slightly late coming to this committee, but that was due to the pressure on previous meetings' agendas. I described the Q1 forecast report as containing a fair amount of detail. This report app does that by some way. Rather than trawling through all the detail, I'll give you the overview that against all the various measures, we are positive and that our treasury management overall is in a strong position. I'm indebted to Councillor Mace for one particular point. So if I refer you to the top of page 113, just for clarity, there's a table there that shows that the credit score of 3.67 is unchanged from the previous year, and the bail-in exposure of 0 is also the same. I'm afraid that paragraph 6.8 says that we've been able to lower our average credit score and bail-in exposure. That comment refers to the previous year, and therefore the report should say that we maintained the previous year's figures. On that note, Chair, I'm happy to take any specific questions if anyone has any.
Thank you very much. The hazard of cutting and pasting reports. Very, very tempting. Any questions? We've kind of partly asked the one about the Lobo loan because that's referenced, referred to here in paragraph 5.2. So we understand how it works. Do we know actually what the loan was, the purpose of the loan when it was taken, at the time it was taken out?
Through you, Chair, just one of the things that often we need to clarify about the capital programme is that loans aren't always associated with particular assets. So we identify all the spending that we need to do, and then we say, well, we've got capital receipts, we've got revenue contributions, we've got section, you know what I mean,
Section 106.
Yeah, well, anyway, those contributions from developers and then borrowing. So we don't apply the borrowing necessarily to a particular asset. It's just added to the capital programme. And at the time, one of the options which were available, rather than going to Public Works Loan Board to borrow, we go to a private bank and get a Lobo loan, which, as Marcus said, was popular at the time, but are no longer in use. But we are stuck with the one that we've got until such a time as interest rates reach a point where they say, actually, we'll take the money out of that and we'll invest it in something else.
Thank you. Any other questions, observations? I mean, there's a interest received is a really, really useful contribution to the overall financial position of the council. So I think it's absolutely worth noting that, and that we have some money in the bank from successful bids and money that is waiting to be spent, which we're making best use of in get interest rates in the meantime. So thank you for that. My only other question, because within this, there are parameters set by government as to what we can and can't do. Do we know whether there might be change in those parameters with the change in government, or is that too early to say?
It is too early to say, but quite often the parameters around what we're allowed to do with regard to capital and treasury management are largely set by the professional bodies. So SIPA and Solis working together in collaboration with the treasury. So it's rarely influenced by government decision making.
Thank you very much. So recommendations that the committee note the details included within the Treasury Management Annual Report for 23-24, and that the annual report is referred to full council for information in accordance with SIPFA Treasury Management Code. So you've got another chance to make observations if it's too late this evening to do so. All those in agreement with those recommendations? Thank you. Then I'm afraid we have got one item of any other business, and that's to do with appointments to outside bodies. So if people can bear with me, it's fairly quick. So 2 matters in respect of outside body appointments, which are fairly straightforward and have arisen as those appointments have to be filled by specific post holders. So firstly, the fact that Councillor Matt Lamb was reappointed to the Corporate Parenting Board back in May but that role is specifically to be undertaken by our Children and Young People's Champion. So at full council in July, we appointed Councillor Katie Collier in place of Matt to succeed him as member for Children and Young People. So the committee is therefore recommended to appoint Katie in place of Matt as our representative on the Corporate Parenting Board. That's the first one. And then the second one is that the Mayor and the Managing Director are ex officio trustee representatives on the Museum of Royal Worcester. In July, P&R agreed to reappoint Louis, but it should have been Mel Olcott because you're not mayor anymore, and Mel is the mayor. So the committee are therefore recommended to appoint Mel. So people happy to agree both those recommendations? Nodding all round the table, thank you very much. You've done terribly well, and I'm sorry it's such a long agenda. Thank you. Meeting closed.